Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here with us today. You know, when we think about greed, our minds usually jump right to those loud, flashy scandals, right? Corrupt politicians or, I don't know, billionaires swimming in a vault of gold coins like Scrooge McDuck. But in today's Explainer, we're unpacking some truly fascinating teachings from Speaker Vlad Savchuk about a highly deceptive spiritual condition, one that operates completely under the radar. The source material we're exploring argues that there is a quiet killer out there, actively choking the spiritual lives of everyday people. And the craziest part? You might not even realize it's happening to you. So we're going to look closely at what this is, where it comes from, and the specific antidote the source prescribes to cure it. Okay, let's dive right into this. The source identifies this quiet, choking sin as greed, but it really challenges our typical understanding of the word. Savchuk notes that we almost always think everybody else has this problem. We look around for the obvious hoarders. But in reality, the source describes greed as this quiet, inherited disease that attacks literally every single one of us. It's actually framed as something we're born with, a condition that, if you leave it unchecked, will slowly and silently suffocate your spiritual vitality. So to unpack all of this, we'll be looking at 5 key areas today. 1. The hidden trap. 2. The origins of the affliction. 3. Case files of ruin. 4. The spiritual thermometer. And 5. Breaking the grip. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the hidden trap. Let's define this affliction.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the vital distinction the source makes right off the bat. It's the difference between simply having money and being obsessed with it. It's possession versus obsession. The speaker points out that, honestly, you don't actually have to be wealthy to be greedy. You could be incredibly greedy with very little. And on the flip side, there are massively wealthy people who don't struggle with greed at all. The source makes it super clear that from a biblical perspective, God isn't inherently against wealth. It gives examples like Abraham, who was called a friend of God, and David, a man after God's own heart. Both of them were very wealthy men. Even heaven itself is described as a place of immense riches. So the simple possession of money, that's not the trap. The trap is the obsession. So when exactly does neutral wealth turn into a spiritual snare? Well, the source outlines 3 very specific triggers. First step is loving it. Drawing straight from 1 Timothy, the text asserts that the love of money is the root of all evil. Second is trusting it. When someone places their ultimate security in their bank account rather than the divine, money becomes a massive spiritual hurdle. And third is wrongly obtaining it. This means getting wealth through theft, fraud, or exploitation. When money hits any of these 3 conditions, the source describes it as a dangerous snare, one that promises total fulfillment but actually delivers piercing grief and destruction. Moving on to Section 2, Origins of the Affliction. Let's trace this disease back to its roots. The source traces the origins of greed way, way back, actually to before the Garden of Eden. It references a prophetic picture in Isaiah chapter 14 that details Satan's fall. And that fall is characterized by 5 statements of "I will." This highlights that at the very root of greed is pride and self-will. It's the self reaching for what belongs to God. This exact spirit of self-interest, the source argues, then infected humanity in Eden. I mean, think about the irony here. Adam and Eve stood in the middle of total, absolute abundance. They had access to literally everything, except one single tree, yet they reached for it anyway. They didn't do it because they were starving, right? They did it out of self-will. So the speaker argues this means greed is an inherited human condition. It's driven by self-preservation and self-interest, not just something we randomly develop on our own. So the crucial point here is this incredibly powerful definition provided by the speaker. He says greed is wanting more than what God has given on terms God had not approved. This definition is so broad, and it penetrates way beyond just finances. The source even uses the example of King David. Remember when David committed adultery, taking someone else's wife? The prophet confronted him using a story about a rich man greedily stealing a poor man's only sheep. At its absolute core, whether it's a lust for power, intimacy, or money, greed is taking on unapproved terms. This brings us to Section 3, Case Files of Ruin. We're going to look at some historical examples of destruction. Let's take a close look at these rapid-fire examples from the text. Now, these aren't people on the fringes. These were figures who were super close to their faith, but they were completely ruined by this. We start with Achan. He hid gold and silver against a direct command, and that one single action resulted in military defeat and the total ruin of his entire family. Then there's Gehazi, a servant to a great prophet. He lied just to collect a reward, and the source notes that greed became like a leprosy on his soul. Think about Judas for a second. He saw the miracles, he was part of the inner circle, but his greed kept him bound. He betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, a choice that ultimately cost him his calling, his life, and his soul. Then we have Ananias and Sapphira. They were punished not for holding money back, but for pretending to give everything. That's greed wearing the mask of generosity. And finally, the rich young ruler. When he was asked to give his wealth away to follow Jesus, he chose his wealth instead and walked away pierced with sorrow.
A major takeaway the speaker draws from these case files, especially the story of Achan, is that greed is literally never a private sin. It's so easy to think, well, it's my money, so it's my issue. But the source uses a really powerful, agitating metaphor here. It compares harboring greed to being a person strapped with a bomb. Because it dictates your decisions, your generosity, and your priorities, walking in greed will inevitably detonate. And when it does, it harms everyone in your proximity. Your family, your community, your close relationships. It's really heavy stuff.
All right, Section 4, the spiritual thermometer. It's time to diagnose the hidden disease. Because greed is so incredibly deceptive, the source provides us with a brilliant 5-step self-examination test. Let's move through it and see how this builds. Step 1 is reaction. When you're asked to give, does it cause anxiety and suspicion, or do you feel pulled toward it? Step 2 is withholding. Are you consistently holding back financially, even when you have more than enough? Step 3 is attention. The source argues that the true competition for your attention isn't actually Satan, it's money. If financial anxiety occupies more of your mental estate than God does, that's a massive warning sign. Step 4 is attitude, which we'll actually look at closer in just a second. And finally, Step 5 is authenticity. Is your generosity just a theatrical performance to impress others, kind of like Ananias and Sapphira, or is it a joyful internal release? Now, Step 4 is so profound it really deserves its own focus. The text highlights this compelling metric: your attitude toward the poor is your spiritual thermometer. The speaker argues that if you regularly walk past legitimate human need with contempt or rationalization, or just pure indifference, well, then the disease of greed is probably much closer to your heart than you might think. How you view those with nothing reveals exactly what you value. And finally, Section 5, breaking the grip. Let's look at the proposed spiritual cure. According to the speaker, the cure for greed is found in the practice of submitting to the lordship of Christ. And the primary vehicle for that submission? It's giving. But the source defines giving in a very specific way. It is not merely the transactional loss of money. Instead, it is the painful yet incredibly liberating act of loosening one's attachment to wealth and surrendering control to the divine. The speaker stresses that your heart follows your treasure, not the other way around. You don't fix your heart first and then give. You give, and your heart is literally forced to follow. That loosening process, yeah, it's painful, because we are so deeply attached to self-preservation. But ultimately, it's what frees you. And this brilliantly illustrates a really profound contrast. The source points out that the first Adam, driven by self-will, selfishly stretched out his hand toward a tree to take what wasn't his. In complete opposition, the last Adam, referring to Christ, selflessly stretched out his hands on a tree to give absolutely everything. This is the pattern this source says is completely required to break the grip of greed. We have to shift from a posture of taking to a posture of radical giving. To perfectly encapsulate the logic of this cure, the source includes this famous, incredibly powerful quote from missionary Jim Elliot. "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." I mean, wow. It perfectly highlights the eternal perspective you need to truly detach from temporary financial obsessions. Now, for those of you looking to actually put this into practice and detach from financial obsession, the speaker, Lad Savchuk, provides a really actionable resource. He notes that giving is deeply connected to spiritual formation. And to help people avoid being manipulated by gimmicks, the kind you sometimes see in religious circles, he wrote a book called A Beginner's Guide to Giving. He actually offers it for free on his website, or you can find it on Amazon. It's his way of guiding others through the painful but ultimately rewarding process of detachment that he experienced in his own life. We've covered some incredible ground today exploring this source material, from understanding the subtle traps of financial obsession to diagnosing our own hearts. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought derived directly from today's explainer. When faced with the abundance in front of you, will you reach out your hand to take or reach out your hands to give? Take some time to really reflect on your own spiritual diagnosis. Thank you so much for joining me today to unpack this explainer. Keep seeking, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.